I'm pleased to announce my intention to, and this is somewhat of a scoop, my intention to run for a fourth term as President of the United States. I will be doing that. I will be having an official, in fact, I think I have, I won 3 times. Now I'm going to do it again. Thank you. I'm going to do it. Should be easy. I'm getting very good at running for president. No, I won 3 times, did very well the second time, by the way. It's a rigged election, but we don't have to talk about it.
You just heard a quote-unquote joke from our quote-unquote president at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and I guess he made this joke to antagonize TDS-brained libs who expect him to go full dictator by declaring himself king or something. He's never given us a reason to do that, so why would that be a fear for us? But the problem with the joke that he told there is that it's not really a joke if he's repeatedly vocalized his intent to do the very thing that he's supposedly joking about, and it especially doesn't land if you already tried to illegally stay in power by inciting an insurrection to overthrow the U.S. government, and it's really not humorous to flirt with this idea of you violating the Constitution if you've already done that again and again and again and again. Like, he literally tried to overturn the 14th Amendment with an executive order, so it's not unreasonable to think that he might try to do the same thing when it comes to the 22nd Amendment. But that's not to say that I think he was officially announcing that he's running for president in 2028. It's more likely one of those situations where you only claim it's a joke as some sort of fallback option if what you said was received poorly. Like when you ask your crush out on a date and you see them cringe and ask you if you're being serious, then you're like, oh, of course not, I was just kidding. Trump, by the way, wouldn't know anything about that since he allegedly purchases women that he's interested in, but that's neither here nor there. The point is that we all need to take Trump's authoritarianism seriously, regardless if he claims it's a joke or not, because he is, in fact, an authoritarian, objectively speaking. When he's not suing media outlets for defamation, he's using the state to pressure journalists into giving up their sources. He's using the national security apparatus to treat his leftist political opponents as potential terror suspects. On top of that, his unaccountable paramilitary is ethnically cleansing people and placing them in concentration camps and denying them all due process. He's also waging illegal wars and using the military to commit acts of terrorism under the pretense of fighting drug trafficking, all while dismantling international institutions that could one day hold him accountable for his crimes against humanity. And this isn't an exhaustive list, of course, but when you zoom out and you see the way that his regime has consolidated power by capturing the federal bureaucracy and the military and the legal system and big businesses and the media and higher education and the national security apparatus with zero checks and balances, the undeniable conclusion is that Donald Trump has transformed America into a competitive authoritarian regime. Liberal democracy, as flawed as it was, is now dead. Full stop. And as incompetent as he is, he somehow managed to check off most of the things on the authoritarian to-do list faster than other contemporary autocrats around the world like Erdogan, Putin, and Orban, to name a few. In fact, political scientist Don Moynihan concluded in August of last year, like many of his peers, by the way, that America had indeed already transitioned into a competitive authoritarian regime with an emphasis on the authoritarian part, seeing as how rapidly we've regressed towards the authoritarian side of that spectrum. But having said that, Moynihan points out one crucial exception when it comes to Trump's power consolidation. One thing he has not been able to do to seize full control of our country, and that is elections. He has not been able to seize control of elections, at least not yet. Now, that doesn't mean that he's not trying, of course. Ty Cobb, who was actually the White House attorney during Trump's first term, speculated that Donald Trump's lie-filled speech about China supposedly meddling in U.S. elections was a way for him to set the stage to potentially declare a state of emergency, maybe to suspend elections. But I mean, that's just speculation. If you look at what he's done, you can tell that this man wants full control of elections. His FBI seized voter data from Fulton County, Georgia, which has been a long target of his over 2020 election conspiracies. But for the other states that have refused to hand over data to the feds willingly, well, he's threatened them. His Postmaster General has threatened to not deliver mail-in ballots to them, which would effectively cancel elections in blue states like Oregon, where we vote exclusively by mail. And his stupidly named Attorney General Markwayne Mullin has even threatened to jail election officials who refuse to comply with the regime's demands.
Can we ensure that the midterm elections are going to be secure? Yes, we absolutely can build confidence in the American people. But the states have to do their part. I will tell you, if the states that choose not to participate with the state program and they choose not to participate in securing the elections, we will make sure that we make those states a priority to look at who voted in their states and hold then the election officials accountable. If the election officials, once we gave them the information they need to secure their elections, and they chose not to, then those individuals can also be held accountable by fines, by penalties, and even, depending on how far it goes, prison time. We are going to make our security enhancements mandatory, meaning that if these states want a grant and they want to be reimbursed to work or to run federal elections, they're going to have to implement security issues. Just security issues. We're not trying to get into anything else, but we're saying that the machines have to be secured and that your voter registration list needs to be scrubbed. We need to make sure that individuals that are legally able to vote are voting.
So they're doing whatever they can to intimidate states and punish them if they don't comply. In fact, the regime actually just admitted that it canceled research grants to states that voted against Trump in 2024, which is illegal, but I mean, that's never stopped him. And mind you, this is in addition to him withholding disaster relief from some blue states in an obvious ploy to either punish them for not handing over their voter data or just punish them for not supporting him. And again, this isn't a comprehensive list of all of the ways Trump has tried to rat fuck U.S. elections. We haven't even touched on the Supreme Court or the things that Republicans have done at the state level to try to tip the scales in their party's favor even more. But when it comes to Donald Trump specifically and his ability to unilaterally control U.S. elections in the way that he controls basically everything else, he simply has not been successful in this regard. So ironically, federalism, states' rights that Republicans claim to love so much, is the one thing that's insulated us from their tyranny. And in a recent interview with Perry Bacon of the New Republic, Professor Moynihan maintains that that's still true as of July of 2026.
There are some structural differences in America relative to, Hungary or Turkey. The federal government does not control elections, right?
Or at least doesn't right now, right?
Doesn't right now, right? But according to the Constitution,
right. Yes,
these are state functions, right? And that makes it much more difficult for any president to say, I'm going to start messing around with the elections. Trump is investing effort here, but I don't think to the point where he's overcoming his structural disadvantages where the states still control things. And, I'll give you some specific examples here. So he fired a part of the Department of Homeland Security that investigated cyber threats to elections. Like these were the people who said, look, the 2020 election was not fraudulent.
Right.
Those people are gone from government. He's written executive orders about mail-in voting, asserting the federal power that he doesn't actually have. He is still trying to pass the SAVE Act.
Yes.
Even like months before the midterm elections, which would be a massive federal intrusion into elections, and also practically unimplementable at this point. If you're talking to a local federal official, like this will completely break the election system. Last week, he fired the federal heads of the Election Assistance Commission. So he is doing what he can. He's launching investigations into previous elections.
Particularly in Georgia, they're raiding offices in Georgia. Yeah, right. Yeah.
And if you're a local election official, and this is one of the things that I think people don't understand about elections, we depend upon this army of local election officials who are not terribly well paid, who are mostly doing it as sort of a civic duty. And in the last few years, a lot of those people have been leaving their jobs. A lot of those people have been facing threats and intimidation. Once that army disappears, it's not obvious what will replace it. And I do worry about just the culture of intimidation and threat that Trump is creating will lead a lot of people to say, this is not for me. But up to now, the structural barriers remain. And so maybe Trump will do more. Maybe he will send like National Guard to election sites. Maybe he will ramp up more intimidation. But up to now, he does not control how people vote. And this does make the midterms all the more important.
So the good news is that even though Donald Trump has succeeded at becoming an autocrat in almost every objective and conceivable way, he still failed to obtain power over the thing that matters the most: elections. Now, again, that doesn't mean that this isn't going to change. It also doesn't mean that Republicans won't try to subvert the election in other ways. Perhaps they're going to try to stop Democrats from being seated if they do take back the House. And I do expect Republicans to do everything that they can to prevent the peaceful transfer of power from taking place. They're going to sue local governments. They're going to demand recounts. They're going to try to obstruct the process in a plethora of ways and conspiracy monger. But so long as Trump himself isn't able to fully wrestle away control of elections from the states, it means that not all hope is lost. And I think that's really important because a lot of people feel like authoritarianism is here to stay and that's just a foregone conclusion. But that's not actually the case, at least yet. And as stupid as Trump is, I think that he knows this, which is why 2026 is really important to him. I wouldn't say that it's the most important election ever. I think that was actually 2024, and we fucking blew that. But this election is going to ultimately determine if states are going to keep control of their own election apparatuses. And I'm not even talking about like the actual outcome itself, who wins and loses. Of course, Democrats have to win. But if Trump subjects election officials to so much threats and intimidation and possible violence that they mass quit, that right there presents an opportunity for a takeover by Donald Trump sycophants who will happily step up to fill the void. But again, elections are local. So the question is, can the same exact thing happen in every precinct in every state across the entire country? Will 100% of election workers be intimidated out of their jobs and replaced by MAGA chuds? I mean, nobody knows for sure, but right now, Trump simply doesn't have the muscle and political infrastructure to carry that out on a massive scale. And he's not even popular anymore. So the fact that, there are less people to go to bat for him is really important. Maybe he's going to try to effectively seize control of some precincts in certain states, but it's going to be very, very hard for him to do it on the scale that he needs to in order to fully take control of U.S. elections. It's a Sisyphusian task at this point. It is exponentially more difficult for him to take control over a decentralized system than it is to, say, bend colleges and law firms to his will by turning off the money faucet. But he is going to try, and it's logical to expect the midterms to be the time when he makes his move. And that really is going to be the test for how long he's able to hold on to power. If he finds some way to take control of elections, then it's game, set, match. We move from a competitive authoritarian system to a closed authoritarian system. It's over. Like, if he can do this, there's no escaping GOP authoritarianism at this point, at least not peacefully. But if the midterms come and go, and regardless of the outcome, he ends up not being able to take control of elections unilaterally, it'll be much more difficult for him to do that in 2028, which means that his dream of running for an illegal third term will essentially be dead, meaning that we'll actually have an opportunity to transition away from competitive authoritarianism back to a flawed democracy. But it's not as easy as just electing somebody else because, as Professor Moynihan explained in his 2025 piece, quote, "A deeper project of reconstruction will be needed, one likely tied to even more intense partisan division and ill feeling. A new reconstruction to fix the Trump era will likely involve a degree of use of state power akin to Trump's actions now, which automatically makes liberals uncomfortable." He adds, "A future Biden-style assumption of return to democratic norms paired with minor legislative safeguards already looks unrealistic and insufficient. That was tried from 2021 to 2024 and failed." So in other words, limp dick centrism isn't going to deliver us out of fascism. It may offer us some temporary reprieve from it, but it's only a matter of time before the next more savvy autocrat perhaps comes along and solidifies our status as an authoritarian regime, which means that Democrats have to elect somebody who is going to wield power in a very forceful, if not unconstitutional way, like Trump, in order to restore democracy, which sounds oxymoronic, but it makes sense because logistically speaking, you can't just take your time with this. It would take decades to fix all the things that Trump broke, and we simply don't have time for that. So our next leader has to unilaterally undo every single thing that Trump did and subsequently impose safeguards to prevent future presidents from exercising power in the same way that they themselves and Donald Trump did going forward. Now, I'm not talking about new norms and, some new gentlemen's agreements. I'm talking about actual reforms and accountability. That means Supreme Court justices have to be impeached. It means people in the regime who broke the law actually have to go to jail for the crimes that they committed. That means Trump and the Trump family. And even though that might seem drastic because we've never really seen anything like this, understand that it's actually more drastic to not do these things to save our country, because as Professor Ruth Ben-ghiat points out, our unwillingness to hold Trump accountable the first time is exactly what got us in this predicament right now.
In Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro lost the 2022 election and then plotted a coup to stay in power illegally. First, he claimed electoral fraud, and then he planned, as we now know from his trial, to assassinate Lula da Silva, who was the incoming head of state, and other officials. This backfired in Brazil because in 1964, Brazil had a military coup, and the dictatorship that followed lasted until 1985. So the people prosecuting Bolsonaro had lived through the dictatorship. They knew the stakes. Bolsonaro was convicted and is now serving a 27-year prison sentence. The United States has had a quite different outcome for a self-coup. Donald Trump lost the 2020 election and did not want to leave office. He claimed the election was rigged. He tried to overturn the results. When all else failed, he incited a violent mob to assault the Capitol and force Mike Pence, the vice president, not to certify the results. This failed, and Trump had to leave office, but he has turned January 6th into an element of patriotism today. And it is very rare that someone who tried a self-coup was not held accountable and allowed to run for office again. The authoritarian we now have in the White House is a direct result of not holding him accountable.
She is absolutely correct. And I think that the problem was twofold. One, it was mass stupidity and cognitive dissonance from the American people who refused to believe that democracy could fall here like it did in other places. And two, I think a lot of Americans knew that Trump was a threat to democracy but didn't care because they simply lost faith in our democratic system, seeing as how their lives continued to get worse regardless of who they voted for. So accountability should be of the utmost importance to any future Democratic administration, but addressing people's material conditions, that's going to be equally important, because if the desperation that we're all experiencing from late-stage capitalism persists, then faith in the system simply cannot be restored, meaning that the ongoing civil war between socialist Democrats and establishment Democrats, it's more than just a fight for the future of the party. It is existential for the country as a whole, because the road to fascism was paved with the failures of neoliberal Democrats in the first place. So if the establishment prevails, then we have no reason to expect things to change for the better. It's probably going to be closed authoritarianism, or at least competitive authoritarianism for the foreseeable future. The only way to escape the death spiral and return to at least a flawed democracy is to opt for the antithesis of fascism, which is socialism. And people might not want to hear that, but like it or not, socialists are the antidote to fascists. Class solidarity is the logical alternative to the divisive culture war politics that ushered in the Trump presidency. Trump's failure to seize control of elections is the universe's way of throwing us a life vest to stop us from drowning. But guess what? That's not going to matter too much if the ship that saved us is taking on a lot of water because it has a gaping hole and we're all pretending like that hole doesn't exist. So in conclusion, authoritarianism might not actually be permanent in America, at least not yet. Not necessarily. We might actually have the chance to dig ourselves out of this hole, but in order to do that and not fall back into it, we have to understand how we got here in the first place. That is crucial.
Do yourself a favor and click the join button on YouTube to become a member. Because Mike's doing a great job getting to watch his videos before everyone else is tremendous. Many people are saying this. Join today, folks. You won't regret it.